Dave Elitch, welcome to Gym Rock Crew. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I've been teaching for over 25 years and I've been a professional musician for a big part of that. What I specialize in is essentially the mind body connection and how musicians can use their bodies and their minds in the best way possible so that they can play to their top level for as long as possible without injuring themselves or getting in their own way physically.
What, in your experience, are the most common mistakes drummers make?
It's a good question. So basically what I have to have the same conversation all day every day with people regardless of whether they're hobbyists or if they're super famous professionals playing arenas. That's because this instrument it's a weird instrument. And for drummers, we're like, whatever, we're just playing drums. It's not a big deal. We don't think about it until there's a problem. So basically, sitting down, human beings are not really meant to sit down, certainly not in the way that we do it in modern day society. So because of the way furniture has been designed in the last 150 years, because of post-industrial society, everyone's sitting in desks and chairs, and now technology with phones, everybody has collapsed into themselves. And they don't understand how to physically hold themselves up anymore in the way that the body was designed to do so. The body's designed to expand, and we're all collapsed inward. So you take all of that, you're sitting down, and then you start lifting your feet up in the air, and it gets really weird because that's a very strange thing to do. And so people end up usually burying their feet into the ground or the bass drum or the hi-hat to hold their body up, or they end up falling backwards to try to counterbalance themselves. And so pretty much everyone, I can just assume someone who's going to walk in to see me is doing one or both of those things, and they have no idea that they're doing those things. And you can do that until you injure yourself. And even if you don't injure yourself somehow, you're still pulling these huge emergency brakes in terms of how your body's supposed to function. So you can get away with doing that, but even if you don't injure yourself, it's such a inefficient way to use your body. So the thing I have to say all the time is people see all these famous drummers or musicians, doesn't matter really what instrument it is, and they say, oh, well, so-and-so does this, does that make him bad? It's like, no, it just means that, the definition of being gifted is to be able to play at a very high level in spite of your poor use of your body, not because of it. So people end up mimicking these musicians that they love, and because they're so gifted, they're able to use themselves horrifically sometimes, and then people copy them, and those people end up getting crippled. And by the way, the people that they're copying, these really talented musicians, they end up getting crippled eventually too, because it doesn't mean that they're not injuring themselves. A lot of these guys, they get older and they completely blow their backs out, like Phil Collins or Larry Mullen Jr. They can't play anymore because of decades of misuse. And the tragic part is, like, if they had the right information, this stuff's all totally avoidable.
That's tragic.
Yeah.
How important then is it for them to work on their posture and core strength too?
The staying out of your own way, the course I just came out with is based on, there's a lot of carryover with what you do, right? So it's musicians treating themselves like athletes, and we have to take care of our bodies. So it's about proper warming up. People don't warm up, or if they do, they're not doing it in a way that's actually beneficial to them. Strength training, myofascial body work, and stretching and mobility, and then also proper cool down as well. Musicians don't do any of this stuff. And, I was lucky enough to have a mentor, Diana Linden, who was a master sports massage therapist who worked with, Hickson Gracie and Ronda Rousey and a bunch of Olympic powerlifters and Olympians and runners and cyclists and all kinds of stuff. So I was lucky enough to be very close with her, and staying out of your own way is essentially like her life's work. And that's how I know a lot of this stuff. I learned it from spending a lot of time with her and learning everything from her. And so this course exists because I was like, Diana, we got to document all of your knowledge somehow. She was not the type of person to write things down. So, way back in the day, I was playing with Daughters of Mara, my old metal band. We actually just got back together recently, but I was having these long rehearsals, hitting super hard, and my left arm started bothering me. And at the time, I was like, 23 or something. I had no idea about any of this stuff. And so I was just like, my arm's bothering me. This has never happened before. And so my buddy Dave Timnick, who plays in this band Intronaut, told me about Diana, went to see her. And she just, went to town on my arm and like got in there and broke up all the fascial adhesions. And my arm was fine in one session. It was all gone. And so the problem with the Western medical system in this specific regard is they don't believe in the pathology of you overusing or misusing yourself and developing fascial adhesions. So people have tendinitis, whether it's from the gym or playing, and they go to the doctor, at least in America, and Europe, most of Europe as well, and they go, my arm hurts, and they go, oh, well, let's give you a cortisone shot. Let's give you surgery. Let's send you some physical therapist who's totally checked out and not paying attention and giving everyone the same 5 exercises, or having people sit on a stability ball and just fucking people up even worse. Chiropractic work is a big waste of time and money, or they're doing acupuncture, which I think is valid, but acupuncture doesn't really do a lot if your whole body is bound up with fascial adhesions. So, the reason I do what I do is because it all works. And for me, nothing makes me more angry, whether it's me or people I'm working with, whether you're seeing a therapist or a doctor or any kind of coach or trainer, whatever. You trust them to help you, and they give you information that's not useful or harmful. That drives me nuts. So I want to give people information that's useful and helpful, and if they put their blood, sweat, and tears into something, whether it's strength training or playing an instrument, that like it's gonna help them, not hinder them. And I don't need to tell you the amount of fitness trainer personalities on social media. Like it's a disaster, and anyone can make an Instagram now. And so you have to be really, really careful. And it's a modern problem that I don't really have an answer to, because it's like, well, how do you know that someone knows what they're talking about? Because you could see someone on Instagram who's like jacked, but you have no idea how much pain they're in, if their central nervous system is shot, like if they're on roids, like who knows,
Yeah.
Anyway, you asked me about core strength, right?
Yeah.
So this is something that, as you're aware of, I'm sure, like people can't even agree on what the definition of the core is. People like, well, what is that, right? That means different things to different people. So most people, when they say core, they actually think your abdominal muscles, right? But your core is like a tree trunk. Well, my definition of it is your whole center of your body. And so the problem with social media and certain, people that are in my space who are sort of think they're helping, they tell people to do all of these core exercises and engage your core and strengthen your core. So when people sit down to play drums, or any instrument for that matter, they end up engaging their abdominal muscles, and they get told to hold themselves up with their abdominal muscles. But the problem is that's not the function that the abdominals are supposed to play structurally, right? Your abs don't hold you up. Your back does. Your back muscles and your spine do. So you get all these people end up flexing their abs, and then they can't breathe because their diaphragms clamp down, and they can't spin, they can't move. So, if you're deadlifting or squatting, you want to engage everything so you can recruit all of the musculature in your nervous system and everything. But, when you're playing drums, you're not load bearing, you're not squatting 400 pounds, right? You're just sitting there. So that's a perfect example of pretty much any time I see someone talk about this kind of stuff in drumming, they get it all backwards. And again, I'm sure they mean well, but at the end of the day, if you're giving people bad info, it doesn't really matter if you mean well or not. So, and that's just as relevant to wind instrument players or anyone sitting down. I mean, the difference with drums or church organ is you're sitting down and picking your feet up, which makes everything way more complicated. So yeah, the core is widely misunderstood. I'm sure you see that all day long in what you do, right?
Yeah. So what exercise or what physical activity do you think complements drumming the best?
People think that if you strength train, you're going to bulk up and slow down on the instrument. There's a big myth about that, right? So, and the reason why that myth exists is because people strength train and they develop muscles, but they also develop scar tissue, and then they don't get the scar tissue broken up, right? So if you strength train, that is extremely helpful with drumming. You just have to make sure you get the myofascial work done as well in tandem with it. You know, cardio's obviously also extremely helpful because when you're playing shows, that's definitely a cardiovascular activity. I mean, it's whole body strength and conditioning, right? It's like it's a really physical, the most physical instrument that there is. There's a whole strength training paradigm in staying out of your own way, specifically for musicians. And there's actually two components to it. There's a at home or like off season strength training, like 4-week regimen, and then there's on tour. Because what happens a lot of times, people if they're strength training, they don't augment their strength training routine to their playing schedule. And so they're lifting heavy and then they go and play and then something gets jacked because they're overdoing it. So yeah, it's not necessarily what you're doing as so much as when you're doing it.
So I've had a lot of musicians I've interviewed here, and a lot of them say that they don't work out when they're touring because it's already stressful to the body, right? Touring. But when they started, they would force themselves to exercise or work out while on tour, and then inevitably get sick or injured. So what is your take on working out while on tour?
You know, when I'm home, I have like a pretty strict routine where I wake up and I go to the gym and then I come home and I teach, or I go to my studio and I teach. I used to work out 6 days a week now with Zamia Cohen, my trainer, who I used on the course. I'm doing 4 days a week, and she gives me a new paradigm every 4 weeks. So I'm actually going to Europe in a week, and I'm going to be there for 2 weeks. So she gave me 2 weeks of a routine home here, and then 2 weeks while I'm on the road. So it's specific for being on the road. And it's totally different. It's bands, it's like foam rolling, it's light stuff. So it's like when I was out with Weezer a couple of years ago, if I'm not home, and especially on tour and they're traveling, my routine goes completely out the window. And I normally don't work out at all when I'm on tour. One, logistically, it's a pain in the ass. Like, you have to go find a gym, and right. And two, what you were talking about is if you're already stressed out and then you start working on top of that, your central nervous system gets depleted and then you get sick, and that can take a while to recover from. I just posted about that on my Instagram this morning. I'm having a lot of people who are doing a lot of double bass, and they overdo it and they fry their central nervous system, and then their legs just stop working. So yeah, like, it depends on the person, it depends on the situation they're in, it depends on the scheduling, how physically taxing the gig is. But I would probably say to like play it safe and not work out on tour, just so you don't overdo it. And that's like based off of most musicians having no idea how any of this stuff works, right? So I think it'd be better to just like play the shows and work on getting good sleep and getting rested, rather than working out and overdoing it and frying your central nervous system.
Yeah, most have said that rest, recovery, and sleep have been like their priority on tours.
Yeah. 100%, especially as you get older. I mean, most people end up, you load your gear, you play a show, you load your gear out, and then you eat a pizza and drink a beer, and then you hop in a van. And like, if you do that over and over again without warming up or cooling down or getting good sleep or whatever, yeah, man, you're going to be messed up. So as you get older, especially traveling internationally, sleep is huge. I mean, even when I'm home, sleep is like my number one priority.
What do you recommend as good recovery techniques for intense touring?
Yeah, well, making sure your nutrition is happening. That's very difficult on tour, depending on where you are. And also, like, if you have like cush, comfortable gigs, sometimes, I'll be backstage and they have like a whole catering or all this food set out, and you're just sitting in the green room and you're just bored. And so it's very easy to just like snack on whatever they have. Generally, it's going to be like not healthy stuff, just because you're bored. So the nutrition thing is massive. It's huge. And then the other thing is like, yeah, making sure that you're warming up and cooling down properly, and sleeping, taping my mouth shut. Sleeping has been a life changer for me. Yeah, the nights of like going out and partying after shows, like, I mean, I just turned 40, but even so, like, I'm not young, but I'm not old, but I very rarely do that stuff now.
Yeah. And I think, like, judging from all the interviews I've had here, a lot of musicians are moving in that direction now.
Yeah, I think people are starting to get aware of taking care of themselves, which is great. because, breath work and yoga and stretching and mental health also has been, people are starting to pay attention to that stuff now, which is fantastic. And that just means that like getting the right information out there is even more important. And just because someone has a certificate, that doesn't mean they know what they're talking about either. I mean, I'm sure you've seen plenty of trainers who have certifications and they have no idea what they're doing. I know plenty of teachers who have a degree from a school and they have no idea what they're doing either. So again, it's very tough to be like, well, how do you know if someone knows what they're talking about? And it's like, you kind of just got to like try it out and see if it works, really,
Yeah.
and you don't get injured.
You touched on mental health. So, what, in your opinion, are the key mental aspects to be able to play better?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about that for the whole podcast. It's case dependent, and it depends on the person and what they're going through. I just posted on my Instagram today about working with someone with like debilitating anxiety, and now they're like touring and playing TV shows, and so we have to talk about different things than someone who doesn't have to deal with that or isn't struggling with that. But a lot of creative people are very hard on themselves, and if they've been doing that for a long time, then they don't realize, it becomes unconscious, and they don't realize how hard on themselves they are. So that can be really debilitating physically and mentally. There's a bunch of ways I could answer this question, but maybe like the simplest way to do it is to tell people to meditate. Just doing 10 minutes a day and checking in with yourself. I mean, I meditate every day, and it's been a life changer. And Sam Harris's Waking Up app specifically has been a mega resource for me and for a lot of my students. So just taking 10 minutes in the morning or whatever, evening, whatever works for you, and sitting down and checking in with yourself and paying attention and making the unconscious conscious and checking in with yourself, because so many people, it's just like the monkey mind and they don't even know what they're thinking or telling themselves, and that stuff can wreak havoc long term. So I think that's the best way to get started and just start noticing things.
Yeah, I think meditation is so underrated. Even with creativity, it helps so much just being quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, because you're able to stop and like, oh, okay, what's actually going on here? It's like those videos you see on the internet of like intersections in like India or in like I don't know, Vietnam or something. And it's all these motorcycles like riding around. It's a complete chaos. So like that's what everyone's mind is doing all the time, and you have to stop and go, hold on a second, let me just like sort this out here, or just even observe it. And that's super helpful, because creative people can be really, really hard on themselves. Most of them are, especially the ones that are really good at what they're doing. And that's why I also go out of my way to talk about therapy when I do podcasts, talk about psychotherapy and or cognitive behavioral therapy, and how that's been the single most important thing I've done in my life, is do therapy, and especially for creative people. I think that's, can save people's lives. And I think creative people love buying into this romanticization of having to suffer for their art, and you don't have to do that, and being able to do therapy and work all your stuff out, figuring out what your stuff is in the first place is massive, and then being able to work it out with someone. I mean, it's not easy, but anything worthwhile doing isn't easy. So yeah, I mean, I guess if I was gonna sort of change my answer, I would say therapy is the absolute best thing you can do for mental health, and then the meditation stuff is great because there's no barrier to entry. Anyone can just sit down and do it.
So when I was talking to Ben, he said that he likes to get into the state of calm before he steps on stage. And I've spoken to musicians who, some of them are on team calm and some of them are on team hype before they step on stage. So what, according to you, is a more effective strategy?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think knowing yourself and knowing how your body is your central nervous system's programmed, how your brain is wired, and what your habits are. So for someone who's more prone to like anxiety, needing to take a couple minutes and sort of meditate and be present and calm your nervous system down before you go on stage is going to be helpful. And then someone who is more the opposite, skipping rope, which is a big thing I talk about before shows, and hyping up your nervous system and getting ready to rumble, is going to be more beneficial. I had someone who I've been teaching for a long time, and I was telling him to skip rope for years, and he finally started doing it. And he was like, oh my God, this is like really hard, but also like really helpful. And then after doing it for a little while, he's like, oh, I had to take a break because it was ramping me up too much and I was getting anxious. So, everyone's different. So maybe for someone like that, because you do need to physically warm up. That's physically extremely important, right? So, I would say setting a little bit of time, extra time, and skipping rope before, and then leaving maybe 5 minutes max before the show, and just being on the side of the stage and doing like a little meditation and sort of centering yourself. Because I wouldn't tell someone to not warm up at all, because it would ramp up their anxiety. That would be, you'd be like cutting off your nose to spite your face. You'd be like totally messing up your body to not freak out your mind, right? So yeah, it depends on the person. But either way, you got to warm up. Just do it in the
Yeah.
way that doesn't make you anxious.
Yeah. And I guess you just learn that, like you said, as you go.
Yeah, yeah, and being in touch with yourself and learning about yourself and learning what your tendencies are. And also, like, visualization, positive visualization is really powerful too. Sitting there and like closing your eyes and visualizing yourself in front of a crowd, like executing everything well. That's extremely, again, easy, no barrier to entry, and can be very powerful for people.
I noticed on your profile you talk a lot about relaxation to be able to play better. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, people love talking about relaxation, and they say all these sort of great catchphrases. But the problem is it actually is pretty nuanced and complex. And so you can tell someone to relax, but chances are they don't know what that means physiologically. Who knows what their body mapping is? Who knows how their brain is wired, how their nervous system is programmed or affected. So first and foremost, when I'm working with people, I have to make sure that they physically understand what it means to relax or release a certain part of their body. A lot of people don't know what that means physically. And then it's a matter of checking in with yourself and constantly reminding yourself. This is why I talk about Alexander technique so much, because it's the single most helpful approach that I've encountered in terms of relaxation and using the body as it was designed specifically. So, and Alexander technique is a difficult thing to explain as to what it is, but it's essentially getting in touch with how the body is. Like, if we forget about playing an instrument, it's if you take a few steps back and you go, okay, how is this body and mind designed to function just in and of itself? And then how are the body and the mind communicating with each other, and realizing that they are totally inseparable from each other, and the body affects the mind affects the body, and we are essentially trying to become 3-year-olds again. So when you watch a 3-year-old pick something up, they squat perfectly, right? Because they haven't learned how to misuse themselves yet, right? When they move, they're expansive, right? The body's expansive. It's not collapsed yet, and they lead with their head, right? So Alexander technique is essentially trying to be a 3-year-old, get back to being a 3-year-old again, regardless of whatever you end up doing, whether you're an actor or a musician or a dancer. Alexander technique is really well known in the acting circles and in classical music, but for some reason it has not made its way over into pop music, which I've been working to help alleviate that for the last few years, because I think if everyone studied everyone would, they'd have a completely different life. I was working with a friend of mine who I've known very closely for 20 years, amazing jazz drummer. And he's in his 50s, and he's finally like, hey man, I am in a lot of pain. And I'm like, all right, I've been waiting for this call for a long time, and because he's playing, he's like looking down like this, and that clamps down on the trapezius and the shoulders and the neck. And then if you clamp down on that area, you can't use your arms anymore, or your body, right? That's the connection between the literally between the mind and the body, is the neck, right? And all the nerves come out of there. So anyway, he's in a lot of pain, and so I gave him a lesson recently, and just getting him to sort of do essentially a body scan and get him to first notice where he's holding tension in his jaw and his lips and in his neck and his traps and his shoulders, to first notice that, and then to secondly give him specific tools to understand how to release that. That's not easy, both to teach that and both to receive it. And then he texted me the next day, and he was like, oh my God, I just played a gig, and I can't believe how much I'm noticing. I can't believe I've been doing this for so long, right? So it's complex and nuanced and you know, I have 4 different Alexander technique teachers I've studied with, and I've learned a lot from each one, and everything has reinforced and strengthened what I've been doing on my own. I've never encountered anything in Alexander technique that is like been counter or sort of disproven anything I've been doing on my own. It's always just been like, yeah, that's exactly dovetailing into what I've been doing. But actually, this person is giving me a couple new tools and different angles, which may be actually a better way to teach it than what I had been doing. So, yeah, Sandra Dager, Bob Britton in San Francisco, David Anderson in San Francisco, and Jean-Louis Rodrigue here, who was at UCLA for a long time. They all come at it from different perspectives, but every time I take a lesson with them, it's mind blowing. So I can't recommend it enough. I tell everyone to get a book called Alexander Technique: A Skill for Life by Pedro de Alcantara. That book is solid gold. Every sentence in that book is fantastic.
It's interesting that you mentioned how the mind and body are connected. And when you have these certain patterns that you create, incorrect patterns, they kind of spread across your body, right? You get these muscular imbalances everywhere, and now you're compensating, and everything just goes out of sync. So it's not just that, right? Your whole body then gets affected because of that little incorrect posture or pattern.
Yeah, exactly. And then like because you're in your body, chances are you're not going to notice it, right? Because you're in your body. That's why having someone to work with, whether it's a good personal trainer or a good Alexander technique teacher or someone like me, what I do, having someone go, yeah, do you notice? Or a therapist, like, hey, do you notice that when this happens, you tend to do this? And you're like, no, but now I do. And for me, the reason why I can do the work I can do is because I'm extremely sensitive. I'm highly sensitive, so I can feel what's going on in other people's bodies, in my body. So I'm able to pick up on extremely subtle changes in someone's body that the average person would not be able to pick up on. It's funny, like when I was training with Zamia, my trainer, months ago, she was having me do Romanian deadlifts because I never did that stuff because I was scared I was going to blow my back out. Not that I had any back issues, but you know, I never wanted to lift like heavy. It wasn't worth risking injuring myself. So we're going over the movement pattern of just with a bar doing RDLs, and like this never happens to me, but I'm sitting there and I'm just like, I don't get it. Like she's like, I'm sitting there doing it and she's like, nope, nope. And then she'd be like, okay, that was a good one. And I'm like, I don't know what the difference was, right? And like that never happens to me because I'm so sensitive. I can usually tell what's happening. But like that's really frustrating when that happens. And when that's happening at the gym, that's much more important to sort out than on an instrument because you're load bearing, right? So if you are not doing something totally the right way, and the tweaks like flaring your lats or bringing your shoulders back, right? Or like engaging something, it's those little tweaks that are the same kind of sort of not the same tweaks but the same level of subtlety, right? Like when someone's playing an instrument that are like really tough to wrap your head around. So like having someone who is able to get the light bulb to go on physiologically is so important and rare, you know.
I usually ask my clients to send me videos of their form because it is so helpful.
Yeah,
And literally, like I'm a coach and I need a coach because I have seen the most improvement in anything that I'm doing, like in any aspect of my life, just by getting a coach.
exactly. That's why, you know, when I tell people, oh yeah, I'm studying with all these Alexander techniques, they're like, oh wow, really? And it's like, yeah, like I'm not perfect. Still have stuff to learn, and I do take drum lessons too. I don't do it that often anymore, but if I see someone where I'm like, wow, this is really cool, you know, I'll still take a lesson sometimes. But to me, just constantly zooming out as much as possible and seeing like how the mind and the body function universally regardless of the context is that to me is what I just keep coming back to. And when you're plugging into these universal truths, like they're true universally everywhere. And I think people run into problems, whether they're teachers or coaches, or just students, whatever, when they start compartmentalizing things and they start separating things out and they miss the forest for the trees and they start going, well, this is this and this is this and this. It's like, no, it's all related.
You spoke about strength training, and I wanted to just get back to that because I've had a few musicians who believe that lifting weights is just to look good. And I wanted to ask you what your thoughts were about strength training and lifting weights when it comes to musicians' careers or longevity.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's an added bonus that you look good, but also a lot of people who are like more like bodybuilders, like they look the way they look, but they might not actually be very strong compared to how they look, right? Or you have like these people lifting boulders in these like world's strongest person competitions and they look terrible, right? But they're super strong. So yeah, I mean, the average normal person working out is going to be somewhere in the middle, right? Where you'll obviously look better. You're not going to be a bodybuilder, but you're going to be stronger too. So a lot of times I'll put my hand on someone's lower back to see how their musculature feels, and a lot of times it's like mushy, right? Because their lower back is weak. And if I'm telling someone they need to use their spinal erectors and their QLs to hold their body up and they're weak, they need the strength train to strengthen those so they can hold their body up. So many people come in to see me and they're so weak in their back that they aren't capable of holding their body up. So that's a very real scenario where it's like you just don't have the strength to do this yet. And also, so many musicians are so internally rotated because when you have repetitive movement with your hands, the front of your body becomes stronger than the back of your body and you become internally rotated. The only solution to that is strength training and strengthening the back, not some goofy fucking strap you see on Instagram or some shirt you're gonna wear, or like dumb trainers telling people to like roll their shoulders back and down and they're walking around like that all the time. Like, so that's a very real thing that I have to tell people every day. I mean, I saw a guy yesterday who was like unbelievably internally rotated. His chest was like caving in, and I was like, dude, you have to really start strength training like now, like years ago, but like now, because it's just
3 years
so.
ago was a good time to start, but today is good too.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the second best time. Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, we don't need to be some sort of like fitness all-star here, but Diana, my mentor, she would say, you need to start working out when you're like 40. Like the older you get, the more important it is. And that's why you see like these old Japanese women gardening and living to be like 105 because they're walking around doing things, using themselves. And then you see all these people in America just living these sedentary lives, sitting around on the couch, and they get sick and because they're out of shape. So it's your body's like it's like an Italian car. You want to beat the shit out of it when you really put it through its paces. As long as you change the oil, right, it runs better. If you baby it doesn't run well. Like you have to put wear and tear on it, obviously in a smart, healthy way. It's like you see these guys in Thailand like kicking trees with their shins, and it's like, yeah, because your bones, when they reform, they're stronger, right? It's, again, as long as you're smart about it. So it's a non-negotiable. Like you have to be active somehow if you want to live a long time and be healthy.
What is your take on alcohol when it comes to touring and playing better and longer?
Yeah, I mean, I don't drink that often. I might have a few drinks once or twice a month. It's not something that's very important to me. I enjoy having a glass of wine with a good meal every once in a while, but when I'm on tour, I very, very rarely drink. I can't imagine, I don't understand how these people get drunk every night and play shows. I mean, like, I get hungover and I'm like, oh God, I'm never doing this ever again. I can't imagine being on tour and, oh, God, like I don't know how people do it. So everyone can do whatever they want, but alcohol, specifically, like once I got my Oura ring and started taping my mouth shut and paying attention to my sleep, man, the first time I had like even a glass of wine, like let alone like several drinks, and I saw my sleep score the next day, I was like, oh my God, this like totally destroys your sleep in a very noticeable way. Even if you think whether it's weed or alcohol, people think that, oh, this is going to help me go to sleep. It's like you might think it's helping you, but on a very real level, it's actually destroying your sleep. So yeah, I think if you're on tour, it's probably the worst thing you can do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense. I'm with
Yeah.
you. What would be your top 3 tips for musicians to be able to play better and longer?
Top 3 tips. Well, it just so happens that staying out of your own way is broken up into three things, right? So strength training, stretching, mobility, and myofascial body work.
Love it.
Those are the 3 things, and making sure you're doing them in the right way, which again is difficult. But those are the 3 things. Like taking care of your body, that's everything.
Tell us a little bit more about your course.
It's for all musicians. It's not just for drummers. Because as I've learned more about Alexander technique over the last 6 or 7 years, and as I get more into the zoomed out, bigger picture of things, I teach more musicians that aren't drummers. So guitar players, bass players, pedal steel players, singers, because the stuff that I'm talking about and doing with people is universal. It applies to everyone. So yeah, I went to a friend's birthday party last night and I was talking to a trumpet player, composer, and it's the same thing every day. He's like, oh, my arm's been bothering me, and it just, I don't know, I'm seeing this physical therapist and it's not getting any better. And I'm like, yeah, that's because you're just adding on to the scar tissue on top of the scar tissue you already have, and like you're not getting myofascial work. And so I put my hands on his arm and I was dug into his golfer's elbow and his tennis elbow, and he was like, oh, and I was like, no one's ever done that. Yeah, no doctors even touched your arm. He's like, nope. And I'm like, oh, and he's like, wow, this is all making so much sense. And it was like, yeah, like, so that's why I made the course, because I have to have the same conversation whether I'm teaching someone or at a birthday party, and because this information is not out there, it's not available. Because when people get hurt, they go to the doctor, and like I said, the doctor's not going to give them this information. So yeah, that's why I made it, because every musician could benefit from it, and there's a real serious need for it. Even if someone is getting massages, which is pretty rare, they might not be getting the right type of massage. They don't understand that it needs to be painful to break up those fascial adhesions. Even if they are working out, who knows what they're doing, right? And even if they're stretching sometimes, maybe doing yoga, which is great, who knows what kind of yoga they're doing, who knows what kind of stretching they're doing, right? So it's about doing those three things: body work, strength training, and stretching, but like making sure that, again, you get the right information and you're doing them the right way that's going to be helpful. I talk about breathing quite a bit in there as well. And I have people coming in who do yoga or have done like the Wim Hof stuff, which is a great tool, but then they end up having dysfunctional breathing to begin with, and then they end up just hyperventilating, and they don't know how to breathe normally, like how they're supposed to breathe, right? Because they're using this like tool as if it's like what they're supposed to be doing every day. So I'm just about getting people like the basic right information that's useful. If anyone, like a strength and conditioning coach or someone who's in stretching mobility or someone who does breath work, if anyone who is a specialist in those areas who actually knows what they're doing sees what's in the course, they're going to go, yeah, okay, yeah, this all makes sense. It's not revolutionary, but compared to the firestorm of misinformation and nonsense on the internet, like I wanted to make something to cut through all of that and go, okay, just don't worry about everything else. Like, this is reliable and useful and comes from people who know what they're doing. So Diana Linden, my mentor, we wrote the script for the course together, and she was 75, and she ended up passing away right before we could film it, which is why I wanted to make the course in the first place, because I was like, Di, you're so special, like I don't want all your knowledge to vanish, So I ended up having to get 3 women to step in and replace her because she was so knowledgeable. So I got Zamia Cohen, who's my trainer, who was the only trainer that Diana liked. She's like, everyone's a moron. Zamia knows what she's doing, because she had worked on her before. Diana had worked on Zamia. And then Kara Norris, who's a massage therapist, neuromuscular sports massage therapist. She's fantastic. And then my friend Yenny Tarma, who used to be a professional bass player, but now is a strength and mobility. I forget what her actual title is. She's going to be mad at me that I screwed this up. But she's like a mobility coach for athletes, specifically as far as stretching and movement. And she has a website called Kari.com, which people can check out. She's great. So that's who I ended up using in the course for each section. I went on my buddy Bill Burr's podcast recently, because I've been teaching him for a long time. And he was very close with Diana as well. She completely changed his life working on him. And he was like, yeah, man, even if you just work in an office, this course could help change your life. And I'm like, yeah, it's really you don't even have to be a musician. It's so, everything I do is because there's a need for it. A lot of the stuff I see out there is not helpful. So I
Yeah.
just want to be helpful.
I saw something that you posted recently. You said that there was someone who was watching your posts and said that, oh, I've gotten all this great information from the free resources that you have on Instagram. And then
Yeah.
when you went over and saw what they were actually doing, and it was kind of all wrong.
Yeah.
So it is so important to kind of go through a proper course to understand start to finish everything. And this is what you were talking about, like Wim Hof and all of these other
Yeah.
techniques. Great, but if you're not using them correctly, you don't even know when you should be doing that. I mean, you can just fuck yourself up even more.
Yeah, 100%. It's so easy. I mean, one of the things that, when I remember years ago, I went in to see Diana and I was like, God, my hip is like bothering me. And she's like, all right, and you're doing a bunch of rehearsals. Did you change your leg workouts in relation to your rehearsals? And I was like, no. And she's like, what are you doing? And again, like I didn't know at the time. And so she was like, look, if you're playing drums, you're an amazing improviser. But she's like, at the gym, don't improvise. You have no idea what the fuck you're doing. You don't have a master's in sports science. You can't just walk around and go, I'm going to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little. She's like, you don't know what you're doing. So you can improvise on the drums, but you can't improvise at the gym. It's way more complicated, and that's not your area of expertise. And I was like, yeah, fair enough. So I teach people maybe half of the time on Zoom, half of the time in real life, and I can see what's going on in literally a second with someone over Zoom or in person. But, I had a guy yesterday who was in town from Germany, who I've taught on Zoom, and then seeing them in person, it's like, oh yeah, like there's obviously like other stuff when we're in the room that's easier to see and also easier to fix. But yeah, people hit me up all the time like, oh man, like you've been so helpful. I'm like, oh, did you do a lesson or did you grab the course? Like, no, just watching videos. And like, these people don't understand, they're trapped in their own house of mirrors, and it's so complex. You can't do this stuff on your own. It's impossible because you don't know what your body's doing or your mind's doing, right?
True. Well, there's been nothing but praise for your course. I saw all the reviews. I think someone even called you Ninja. Freddie Sheed or
Oh
something.
yeah, Freddie's amazing. Yeah, great drummer, great guy.
So they've been pain-free and they've been able to play longer. So that's really cool.
Yeah, that's the whole point. And like Freddie was doing this crazy show in France at the time, and we went over some posture stuff, and I got him a new throne, and he was like, "Oh my God, like everything's gone. Like I feel so much better." Like that's how you know if stuff works or not.
Well, Gym Rockers, go check out Dave Elitch on Instagram and also his course. Dave, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.